Pedro Alonso López was born into violence long before he unleashed it upon the world. He came into the world in 1948 in the chaos of civil war. Torn Colombia, a country where poverty could swallow whole families and spit out ghosts. His mother, a sex worker barely surviving, raised him and his siblings in a single dirt-floored room where strangers entered at night and fights broke out before sunrise. López later claimed he never knew tenderness, only hunger, noise, and the sound of men bargaining for an hour of her time. At 8 years old, after being caught stealing from his mother, she threw him out, literally. One morning, she dragged him into the street and locked the door, leaving him to sleep in alleys and under abandoned carts. He became one of thousands of invisible children wandering Colombia's cities, starving, desperate, unnoticed. That was when the first transformation happened. López was taken in by a man who pretended to offer help. Instead, he assaulted him for days. The experience carved something dark into López's psyche, a mixture of humiliation, fury, and a vow he repeated in later interviews. "I promised no one would ever hurt me again. I would be the one to hurt." He fled the city, joined a band of street children, and survived by theft. But betrayal followed him again. A group of men kidnapped him, assaulted him, and left him for dead. The world around López was a circle of predators, and he emerged believing that cruelty was a currency, one he intended to spend. He claimed he tried to rebuild his life at a school for homeless children run by Americans, but even there, he said he was abused. Whether every detail is true or distorted, one fact is certain. López walked into adolescence shaped by terror and rage, convinced he owed the world a debt of pain. His criminal path began small: theft, car parts, small robberies. He drifted between Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador, countries where borders were porous and missing children were rarely investigated. Courts and prisons were revolving doors. López learned to survive by watching, studying, waiting. In adulthood, he traveled constantly, hitchhiking, working odd jobs, stealing when he needed to. He was invisible, no home, no family, no record that followed him across borders. He moved through crowded bus terminals and dusty markets like a shadow. But somewhere along those years, the shift occurred. The compulsion grew. The target became specific. Girls, young, poor, often from rural or indigenous communities, 9 to 12 years old. Children who walked alone on dirt roads, selling produce or helping their families. He later confessed he lured them with small gifts, a mirror, a trinket, a promise of food. Then he led them away. By the time authorities realized what he had become, the number was beyond comprehension. López began killing in Colombia in the 1960s and 70s. But the country's instability meant police rarely connected cases. A missing girl was a tragedy, yes, but one blurred among thousands displaced by poverty and conflict. When the disappearances multiplied, communities assumed kidnappers or traffickers were responsible. But López didn't stay in one place long enough to be caught. He crossed into Peru, then Ecuador, then back to Colombia. He slipped through gaps no one had bothered to close. The real nightmare began in Ecuador. In that country alone, López would later lead police to 53 graves, all girls. It was only a fraction of what he said he'd done. Investigators, overwhelmed, insisted on photographing each location as proof. Many officers broke down. Some refused to continue. The exact number of victims will never be known. But López confessed over 300 murders across 3 countries, making him one of the deadliest serial killers in modern history. Even veteran detectives described the details of his confessions as unforgettably cold. The turning point came in 1980, when a group of indigenous villagers in Ecuador caught López attempting to kidnap a girl from their community. They were prepared to execute him on the spot. Customary justice in regions with little police presence. But a traveling priest intervened and convinced him to hand López over to the authorities. When police arrested him, they didn't yet understand who they had in custody. But that changed quickly. López began to talk, not in panic, not in guilt, calmly, almost proudly. He told detectives they would find bodies everywhere. He described how he followed markets, bus stops, roadside paths, how he waited until a girl was alone, how he took them, and how, afterward, he left their bodies in shallow graves, sometimes arranged, sometimes covered with debris. Investigators didn't believe him at first. No one could kill hundreds without being noticed. But López insisted. "Come," he said, "I will show you." And he did. One grave, then another, then another. 53 confirmed. Hundreds suspected. 3 countries connected by a killer who knew how to vanish. It was one of the largest coordinated serial murder investigations in world history, yet barely known outside South America. The Ecuadorian courts convicted López of 110 murders, the maximum provable number, and sentenced him to 16 years in prison, which was the harshest penalty allowed in the country at the time. 16 years. For hundreds of children, he served only 14. While incarcerated, he participated in psychological evaluations and repeatedly insisted that once released, he would continue killing. His exact words, "I am the man of the century. No one will ever stop me." López believed he was untouchable, and for a moment, he was. In 1994, López was released from prison in Ecuador for good behavior. The public was not notified. The families of the victims were not warned. But almost immediately, López was rearrested, this time by Colombia. Authorities there wanted answers about the disappearances of children that matched his timeline. He was evaluated at a psychiatric facility and diagnosed as insane and highly dangerous. Rather than sentencing him to prison, Colombian authorities placed him in a psychiatric hospital. He remained there until 1998, when he was, staggeringly, released again after posting a small bail. After that, Pedro López disappeared. Some investigators believe he returned to Colombia's rural regions. Some believe he crossed into Venezuela, where reports of similar crimes surfaced in the early 2000s. Others believe he died, murdered by vigilantes or rival criminals. But no body was ever found. No confirmation ever surfaced. No closure was ever given. Interpol still lists him as wanted. His location remains unknown. His crimes remain partly buried. And his victim count, the true number, may never be fully understood. What makes the story of Pedro López uniquely chilling is not just the scale of his crimes, but the failure surrounding them. A justice system too weak to stop him. A border network too disorganized to track him. Communities too poor and vulnerable to be heard. And a world that didn't fully grasp what he'd done until decades later. But the most haunting question isn't how he escaped. It isn't why he killed. It isn't even how many victims he left behind. The real question, the one investigators still whisper, is this: how many killers like him disappeared into the same shadows? And how many are still out there, unseen, walking freely across borders a world never guarded? Asterisk, asterisk. A question with no comforting answer. A question that echoes across history. A question that reminds us some monsters aren't caught. Some disappear. And some, like Pedro López, are never truly gone.